everyone had a chance to review the March minutes?
I move we accept them as written.
Do I hear a second?
I shall take second.
Are there any discussion? If there being none, we shall vote. Mark?
Haley, aye.
Michael, aye.
Shallon Tate, aye.
The minutes are approved. We would next like to, Vanessa, do you want to introduce our new assistant director?
Yes, ma'am. We finally selected a new assistant director for the library, and her name is Sarah Stewart. Sarah has been with the library since 2007, is that right?
2009.
2009. I wrote it down and I don't know what I did with that. She was the department head for adult services until I conned her into being assistant director. So I'm really happy to have her, so I'd like to welcome Sarah Stewart. Thank you for the opportunity.
Don't blow it. We're going to go out of order a little bit today. Our attorney, Mr. Don Mixon, is here, and he's needing to go to Truman to another meeting, so we're going to let him speak first.
Somebody pick me up there?
Hold it a little closer to your mouth.
Okay. That's what I was afraid of. Board, I'm Don Mixon. Some of you have met me before, and some of you have met me virtually, I guess, when we did the training some time ago. And it's especially nice to see Shelley, who I have seen ever since she was a little schoolgirl. So, and known her well. I was asked to look at your media policy, and I wanted to mention a little bit about that. I think the policy is well written. I think it covers the kind of things that you need to cover. I'm aware that a lot of these things get taken care of internally because whatever filters that you have on will filter out a lot of that type of material. That's the appropriate way to do things. Since the technology has advanced the way it has, that makes it a lot simpler for the staff. They don't have to watch everything. I will say that my concerns about the use of the social media fall directly on how you board members interact with it. You board members will, of course, interact from time to time on social media. You've got a Facebook for the library, but you speak in an official capacity. And I'm sure that you all understand that that's your role in an official capacity with the library. And you need to be a little bit reticent about your engagement on these public forums. Because as you speak, especially if you identify yourself as a board member, then that carries weight to the particular listener, either positive or negative, depending upon what is said. So one of the things that's a difficult thing, I spent 10 years on a school board having to deal with this. Fortunately, we didn't have Facebook quite the way you have it now. But that's one of the areas where we need to be cautious as we get on and use those services. But the policy, I think, is well written. You have a staff. I've had a chance to spend a fair amount of time with Ms. Adams, and I believe she's an excellent choice for you, and that she's going to head this library in the correct direction. I also, and if anybody has any questions about the social media, I'd be happy to answer those. also know that some of you have had questions of me, and some of you may think I'm a very rude person because I won't talk to any of you individually, but that's by design. And you are board members. Any one of you individually has no standing with the library, except that you're a friend. Collectively, you do have standing. And so I'm very cautious about giving advice to single board members. So if you get a no from me, or I can't answer that, or you think I'm ignoring you, it's simply because I think that's something that may need to be responded to as a matter of the whole board. So that's the way that I try to handle those things. And I think that's the appropriate way. But I am happy to answer any questions that any of you have about that, or about any other aspect of freedom of information. Before I forget it, I will say that there's one thing that you probably don't have to worry about on this board, and that's executive sessions. Those are only good for employment, and you employ the person that you employ. So that ought to be a rarity. I can't imagine an example right now, but that ought to be a rarity going forward, that you would ever have an executive session. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that maybe some things on your minds that you have some questions of me, and now you're all together. I can answer.
Mr. Nix, I do have thank you for your time, by the way. You know, you're aware of kind of what's been going on with the library, and how there's been, you know, basically this idea that if there's any discretion over what's appropriate, you know, that goes on the shelves, then that is censorship. You know, so I use the word discretion, someone else may use the word censorship. But it seems like this media policy, we're establishing standards by which we can censor what's on our media platform, right? By these standards, and they're pretty vague standards, because there's like the word offensive. That may, you know, that's pretty subjective. So could you help me out to understand how, you know, over here there's censorship, but when it comes to our media policy and our social media, we can censor, we can apply standards to that censorship, and so explain that to me, that logic, and then also, you know, who gets to define some of these terms, like offensive?
Well, let me go back to something that we had to look at in law school. When William O. Douglas was asked about, he's a great Supreme Court, liberal Supreme Court justice, who was asked, what is obscenity? What is pornography? And his answer was, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. That's not the test. He missed it. The test is that it needs to be somewhat objectively based, and it needs to be consistently applied. And when you put those two things together, that's why I mentioned computers earlier, because computers help us do that. Computers spot certain phrases, certain words, certain content, and they may say, that can't go, and it gets screened. And to the maximum extent possible, that's what you want to work with, because that's supplying that kind of objectivity. That they're not programmed for, if I see something that Nixon wrote, then that's pornography. It's set instead for, if the word pornography comes up, then we're going to see something excluded.
So excluded, is that, so you use the word excluded. Is that censorship, or is that discretion? How would you define that?
Well, I don't define it as either one. I define it as, the decision to take that word out.
Based off the standards
Now,
that
yes,
we
based off of
that we all kind of come up with, these standards, right?
No, I do not think it is something that you all come up
Well,
with.
that's what we have.
I think it is something that you set the parameters for.
Right.
And those parameters here, I think, are reasonably defined. Now, there still remains the question of, can we apply that? I do not think you need to come up with a system that appoints an individual or a team of individuals to look at everything and then exclude what that team or that person wants to exclude. I think instead, you should set up objective practices. I think this to be broadly objective, but within this, of course, every one of you could have a different decision as to what is a specific and imminent threat. It could be a different question about that. I don't like the library, I've had it with the library, I'm sick and tired of them messing up my library card. I'm gonna get even somehow. Was it threatening up until I'll get even somehow? Or was the fact that he used, maybe he stopped before he said I'll get even, but he used some profanity? There's a lot of judgment to be used in all of that, and we want to leave that judgment, that individual judgment, out of it. What we want to do instead is to create what you all feel is a good objective standard, and follow that standard. And these are only telling you areas, the bullet point list, the guidelines. They're guidelines for your policy. It doesn't say, if I write the words specific and imminent threat, that's automatically taken away. Because that could be used in context not to be a threat. So there has to be some evaluation, and to the maximum extent possible, the best way is to use those filters.
I kind of feel like Mr. Nixon just solved our youth and children's section issue. We have standards that we can apply that we all agree to, and we apply those to the books, which is really what we're doing here. So I think that's wise to have that, and so I think that's a great point.
Any other questions?
We've been getting a lot of stuff about freedom of information, which is coming, what's actually covered by freedom of information? Because we just referred to you.
I'm glad you got into that, because there's a couple of things I wanted to say about that anyway. But with freedom of information, there's two areas. One in your meetings and your advisors. Look, I probably go, I don't know how many, 40 some odd school boards that I go to. And in those school boards, nobody's got the kind of coverage that you do. You have the most coverage of any public body that I represent, and I represent a lot of them. Because every time you have a meeting, you got the TV cameras. Anybody who wants to get up there, well, I imagine, because I know my son watches it, he's going to say, you should have combed your hair before you came, what little you got. He'll notice. And other people have commented to me about that. So you have the meetings covered. And I don't know of any problems. We did have one where that wasn't covered correctly early on under a prior director. And our recommendation was we own it, and we did. And we took care of that. And paid a little bit of an attorney's fee for the mistake. That's what you do when that happens. Not an intentional mistake, but it was made. The other part are the records, and that's what is the real issue here. The records, if the library has the information, and they understand what the request is, then they've got to supply that particular information. There can be redactions. For example, if we have something that comes in and it has to do with an employee of the library, then we may not allow all of that information to go out. If it had to do with the job performance of a library person, then that part is protected, because that's for your director to deal with, and it's not for the public to get to, and that's in the Freedom of Information Act. If it is a personnel file, but not about job performance, then the basic personnel information can be released. That one's pretty simple. Where it gets tough is where you get a question that says, I want everything you have on this subject. We don't have a record that keeps it by that subject unless it gets really broad. If they ask for everything you have in the fiction category, maybe, I don't know if you do or not, maybe there is a list that we have of fiction books that we can send out if there is a record. But what Freedom of Information is not about is to ask for opinions. If a request comes in and says, I want every book that is about, and it gives a subject, I want the name of all of those, then likely the response is going to be, we don't have that record. It's not that we might not want to venture an opinion if we were in a discussion with you as to what book you might go check out, but we can't give it to you because we don't have a record that's listed that way. I want to know everything about Vanessa Adams' background. I want her past history. Well, we might have the resume, and I guess we still have that over in some place, the resume that she submitted, so we can supply that. But we don't have things before and after that. So that's what we supply. We say supply, this is it, this is what we've got. And that's a good answer. If we get something that says, and I'm using this example because I suspect the question's going to come to me anyway, if you have something that says, we want everything that you have now or get in the future about a particular subject, and we have that deadline of when we answer, of 3 days or whatever it works out with the calendar, then we're going to answer for the records we have, period. Future things that might become records are not records. So we don't answer that. Now, if there is a request for something that gives a deadline later on for all those books, then it needs to be answered at the deadline, and you supply whatever you have. You see the difference in those two things? If you want a 3-day deadline, you get what we've got during that period and prior, everything prior. But if it is on for a date in the future, a month away, then unless that person says, I'll wait till that period of time, then we won't be sending anything past what we have now.
Do they have to ask again, or can they say, I want everything in the next 3 months when they're ready? I mean, do they have to ask again every month for that info?
On my example, let's take it first. On my example, where somebody is saying, I want everything, but it's okay through the end of the month, or I want everything through the end of the month, but I'm under the 3-day rule. I guess that's the one. Then I would say, no, I would put it in the email when you respond is, if you want what the status of the records is at the end of the month, you need to send us another request. If there is something that says, I would like to get each month's agenda, then you're on notice about that anyway, and when they ask for that, you can send the agenda each month. But to the maximum extent possible, we want to keep from having to have these future requests because they get lost. And it's not going to work.
My big issue in first of all, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your time because this is what I've been trying to achieve. It's just your time and for our attorney to answer some questions. I hate that it has to be a public meeting like this and we can't just conversate through our director or through emails. We need to come up with some sort of policy because, you know, the past 2 lawsuits that we've had, if or when we get sued again, Joey McCutcheon already stated that, you know, it will be let me look real quick if I have it in mind. Criminal charges. And so that's kind of scary for me, especially for somebody that's new, and I'm all for full transparency. So since we're talking about these FOIA requests, I know for a fact there's 2 of them that we haven't answered yet. And when I received a personal FOIA, and when I reached out to you, I got nothing in return. So that is troubling to me whenever you say we have to speak as a board. The FOIA request, I'm a board member, I received a FOIA request. No other board members received that. It was sent directly to me. And so in that situation, I mean, are you wanting us to go through Vanessa? I mean, and also another question I have is, I've asked this during our training, who responds to these FOIA requests? And I haven't gotten an answer. That's been the issue here. And just like you came on record a moment saying that you may think, or some of us may think that you're being rude, but you're addressing this the way that you feel like it. I don't necessarily believe, I'm not being rude, or I don't believe you're being rude, but we could cut that out if we just had direct communication. So I guess I don't know, I just feel like it's a mess, and I'm scared of another lawsuit, which I feel like we all should be fearful of that.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe you have the same opinions, the same objections, the same beliefs about the library that the woman to your left has?
Some of them.
Some of them. Some of them is the key. So I can't, you got a Freedom of Information request. You happen to be a member of the library. You could say back, I'm not the library. You need to send that to the library. Because you're not the library. You aren't a public body. Only public bodies have the duty to follow the Freedom of Information Act.
Well, I emailed you and asked if this was a lawful request, and I didn't get a response. So how am I supposed to know that if I don't have communication with you?
Your reply to me had more to it than that. But
You're right. I had emailed you 11 times, actually.
may have had 24. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying to you is you have certain opinions. Other people have different opinions. The only way that the library can answer it and deal with it is if the library gets it and it checks its records. It is not for you to respond. Because you have no standing to respond.
That, at the beginning, do you understand what I'm saying? Like if I just would have had some sort of guidance there.
And I'm sorry that I was not clear enough in our training because we did cover that. And I'm sorry that got through. I think you were there live.
I was.
And I'm sorry that didn't get through to you, but the point is that it's for the public body.
So they would have, if they wanted to request our cell phone records, they would have to request everyone's cell phone records for, you know, the specific time they wanted it. It wouldn't be an individual person on the board.
Let me please hold that one for just a moment, and just finish with this, because I do want to go to that and talk about cell phone and email addresses, because that poses another issue. And if we're ready to go, I'll go ahead and talk about that.
That was my question too.
Okay, your cell phone records are your personal cell phone records. You should not be doing attempting to do library business there. But they're your personal cell phone records. If you're routinely conducting library business on your cell phone, then you're going to open yourself up to your cell phone being getting a request for that. If, for example, let's say 2 or 3 or 4 of you decide this is the way we want the board to go about something, and you're communicating back and forth, and then you get together, because you've got 4 of you, and then you vote, and you pass whatever it is you just laid out, what happened to the public input? It's gone. You decided privately what you were going to do, not that you have, I'm just using that as an example, and that will work. What you do instead is, if there's something that you think is important, then you should send that information. I would like us to talk about X to Ms. Adams. And Ms. Adams then can say, here's some information on that, and give you some information on the subject. She could say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that, and maybe send something out to the board, like the preface to the agenda, to say, I want to put this subject on the agenda for discussion, and then it could be put on there. Or it may be that you're a solo, and there's probably not much interest right now, and we may need a little bit more background.
So we shouldn't be named individually in the board. It should be addressed to the board. So the board, we need all the members of the board's text messages if they pertain to the library business by this time frame. So really, naming the person individually is not appropriate for you. It's really the board that has to be named. Is that correct?
Well, the board would be the one that's going to get named.
Okay.
Because it's a public body. It's the only public.
Well, that hasn't been the case. We've been individually for you.
I know, I understand that, and a lot of the lawyers will put that up there, but that doesn't mean that you're liable for it.
Yeah.
It's the library that would be.
Some of the requests that we have been receiving are for our texts that we send or accept during the board meeting. So, and a lot of times that's an innocuous, like, husband wants to know when you're coming home, that kind of thing. I mean, do we have to, exactly, that's what Haley was talking about earlier, Haley. So is that under FOIA? I mean, do we have to send all of that?
Well, first, let me say that it's best to put your phones away unless you're using them to look at the agenda instead of printing it.
I keep my notes on here.
But you should otherwise put it away. Don't be on it. Because if you're on it, look, I've just actually had a hearing, which was hybrid. It's part online and part in person. And someone online was texting the lawyer on the other side of the hearing, or excuse me, the client on the other side of the hearing, who's then sliding the phone over to the lawyer and cueing the lawyer about what to say. It was an expert witness who was up there. Well, that's just, you can't operate that way. what would the audience think if you're all the time texting back and forth? Now, the simple example that you gave, then I think that's fine. But I would probably say, if it's gonna take a few minutes to respond, you get a call that your child's sick, something like that, it's gonna take just a moment, speak up and say to the rest of the board, I need to take just a second, because I gotta respond to this thing about my child. So there's nothing wrong with the public knowing that. So, you wanna do that for two reasons. You don't wanna be conducting business on your cell phone. And even if you're not conducting the business, you don't want the public thinking you are. It's the appearance, as we have to follow it, it's the appearance of impropriety. So we'll give him a moment to check on his sick children.
It's a personal call. I'm not well with it.
Oh,
No, I'm not gonna take it. I'm not shutting Go ahead, there we go.
let the younger woman next to you.
You're absolutely right on that.
I have to holler all the time in my office for somebody to come help me with this computer. Did I answer that question?
No, honestly,
Yeah, no,
if somebody texts or asks me for my text that I sent from now until the end of this meeting, do I have to send
that's
that to them?
subject to FOIA.
No, well, no, but if you were on it long enough that you think that, that's something that we would probably staff about, and
Okay.
if it was on there long enough, then we might submit something that redacts most of what was there. If it was about your kids, we'd redact it, we'd just black it out.
I ignore mine when I'm here.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
That-
I've texted a few times, but most of mine are to my husband or to my father checking on me. And I know that that was one of the FOIAs that I've received. And the little messages that I've had, the very little that I've even checked on my phone, I handed those over, but I redacted the names on them. Some of the phone numbers I have never saved as a name, so it's just their actual phone number in there, so I redacted that for personal reasons.
You know, that's fine.
Okay.
But let me say this, I've been talking about your personal phones.
Right.
If you are interacting with the, what's the libraryboard.com, or what's your,
Right.
Board at Library in Jonesboro.
yeah, board at library in Jonesboro. If you're on that, you're public. Because it's kept at the library. So it doesn't make any difference. If you get on there and use it, I don't care how personal it is. I just got from the doctor, I got a diagnosis of cancer, and I don't think it'll last much longer. Well, we're gonna try to see if we can keep from revealing that, but we probably won't be able to. Because you use board at library in Jonesboro. So you stay off that. Frankly, for that reason and the policing issues that it brings about, I don't like it. I'm not telling you you can't have that. I think that's fine. But if you do use it, you've got to be doing it carefully. Only about library business. Because otherwise, everything you put down goes into that, the library records. And then it becomes a record. If you're on your private phone, it's not.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
So, something that happened, discourse like that, say 3 or 4 months ago, and I keep my phone up to date. So after I've received any kind of information through that particular email or responded to it through that particular email, after a week or when it's no longer appropriate, I just delete it.
So the board, the library board is actually responsible for any FOA of recording the communications on that particular email. Is that correct?
Well,
I don't have to have them saved.
you don't have to save it.
No.
I mean, have it saved.
Okay, that's one
But
make sure.
even if you delete it, it'll still be in the
Exactly.
library.
And it'd be the library's responsibility to report it on any FOA.
Yes, and I am really after what goes through the library.
Mhm.
I think virtually everyone I've responded to had the connection back to the library. If you're not going through that, it's not gonna be there. I'm not telling you how to hide, I'm telling you, keep your personal stuff out of the library. Including personal opinions. Now, I don't, maybe that's too broad a way to say that. I'm just saying that if you are absolutely strong about something, you can share it to your heart's content, but it's best to leave the library out of it.
Back to communicating with you, apparently we need to develop some sort of policy or something, that way things are not falling through the cracks the way that they have. So if I have a direct question, let's say the board has received a FOIA request and I have a direct question for you. Can I email you? If not, do I email Ms. Vanessa? Are you wanting to only speak through her?
Look, I'll make this real clear.
Please.
You can email me and I won't answer.
Okay, so
That's what I just talked about a ways back. I am not going to answer that question because I don't know everything that goes on behind that question, and I don't want to get in a position of I am responding to this board member who then repeats what I say to the board to tell the rest of the board this is the way it's going to be because that's what the lawyer said. Or the other way around. We need to get a new lawyer.
So if we email you, if I email you through my email and the board's email, how do you want us to respond?
I
How do you
don't
want us
look
to
at the board.
communicate with you?
Go to Ms. Adams. If you have a question and you think the lawyer needs to be involved in answering it, get it to her.
Well,
Or to your board
previously.
president. Give your board president,
Yeah, I mean, we've done that previously in the past weeks, like we were just speaking, and we've done that, and it still didn't get answered, so that's why.
well, I may not be able to answer that. I know I have not answered anything recently because I knew I'm coming here. So if it's been recent, I'm gonna talk to the board. I want the board to understand, I do not represent you. I do represent the library and its board as it's together, even with different opinions. And so, and you could use your board president or Ms. Adams as someone to send it through, but you aren't the one who has to answer the FOI. You may have no duty to answer it.
So we should expect, if it goes through Ms. Adams or our board chair, we should expect a response.
Unless there's some, well, you should expect some response. Unless there is it may be that we don't have this, or this isn't subject to the act, or something, or.
There will be some feedback, I mean, even to that regard, we're not.
That's right.
Some direction.
That's right. But let me say, these things don't have hard and fast definitions, rules, it just says records. So if there's not any records, then, and actually, you can make a freedom of information request as an individual. So if it comes in that way, it's just, you're making a request to the board. And we respond to it. And it may be that we don't have anything, or we can't answer that for a particular reason. If it is subject, if it has to be omitted or we can't send it, then there'll be a citation as to why. Sometimes Ms. Adams will be able to respond herself about that, sometimes it'll be me responding, or sending her, the citation to put in, or something like that. What else? Is that it?
That's my question about freedom of information. I thought I knew the middle school board with you.
Well, you were present, in person when we had the session, you were too. Yeah.
But I want to double make sure.
Well, it is very, it's the same item, doesn't make any difference to the World Library. And I'll tell you, the libraries and schools are getting this request too. There's nothing else? Mr. President?
Thank you for coming. I think we were good to get that clarified again.
All right, thank you, y'all did.
Thank you for your time.
I'd rather stay here.
Vanessa, did you mean for us to go and vote on this today?
Yeah, on the social media policy, yeah. And we added something in red to the,
Do you want to explain
yes, so we
do nothing else, that's
Yeah.
later on in that.
well, we moved it up.
it? Moved out of order.
Yeah, so we talked to him, let's just go ahead. Well, Lily wrote the social media policy, and then I added this section at the very end in red about staff responsibilities. And then, Lily called me and we talked about it some more, so in the red, there's also a couple of passages that are in black ink. So that's the new passages that were not on the, proposed policy that you guys were sent by email. So what it just says, she wanted to add, that social media platforms should not be used to collect personal identification information about the library's users. Information shared by patrons on the library's social media sites may be used for marketing purposes. And so I thought I would just briefly explain that what that means is, when we're looking at Facebook statistics and we see that more people are on Facebook, say at 11 a.m., then that might be a time when they want to post more events at 11, just so that more people see them. So that's really the level of marketing purposes that would be used for. So it's not really anything invasive, and she just wanted me to be, so you guys all of that, be clear about it. And if there's any questions about it, just let me know.
I've got a question. Who reads the post and decides if we've received a threat, or if we've received a harassing comment? Is it a team?
Our public relations and marketing committee does.
So there's two people, or?
There are two until tomorrow. We have third one coming tomorrow.
Now, these posts, that if they read and they say, oh, I find this offensive, do they bring it to you and present it to you to possibly it being taken down?
They usually run it by me, yes.
Yes, help me understand, maybe someone that understands more than me, why we can have all these standards for our Facebook page, but we can't have any for the children's section.
We do have standards for the children's section.
Does it apply to our library code of conduct,
Does it apply to what? I'm sorry.
our books? Do they apply, is there a code of conduct for our books? Or
There's not a code of conduct, there's an evaluation process they go through.
what about books that are offensive?
What about what?
Books that are offensive?
have a standard so that we select our materials.
And that's not censorship.
No, that's not censorship. No, that's an objective process,
Based off of standards.
based on an objective set of standards.
I'm glad we put that.
Someone want to make a motion about the social media policy?
I make a motion to accept the social media policy.
I hear a second.
I'll second.
Are there any more discussion before we vote? Michael?
Aye.
Hi, Shelley Tate.
Michael Watkins.
No, Haley Lester.
No.
No.
Motion carries for the ayes. Now it's time for the public comments. I believe we allow 5 minutes, isn't it? Haley, you gonna be the timekeeper? Rev Terry Riley.
I'd like to thank the board for allowing me to address them tonight. I'd like to speak about the issues that are going on with the children's section that's been going on for a while here. And I sit on the board as well of a nonprofit charitable organization, so to each and every one of you, have my condolences. I'm speaking tonight as the high priest of the Southern Delta Church of Wicca, ATC in Lake City, Arkansas. I would like to address the LGBTQ books that are up for removal from the children's section. And I heard discussion just recently now that you need a standard. I believe the board already has a standard, and I will read it here. It's from the American Library Association, 2019 Midwinter meeting, and the library board, main library board regarding challenge resources says, and I quote, on the civil rights of minors in public libraries. Library should not be limited to the selection and development of library resources simply because minors will have access to them. A library's failure to acquire materials on the grounds that minors may be able to access those materials diminishes the credibility of the library and the community and restricts access to all library users. Children and youth adults unquestionably possess First Amendment rights, including the right to receive information through the library in print, sound, image, data, social media, online applications, games, technologies, programming, and other formats. Constitutionally protected speech cannot be suppressed solely to protect children or young adults from ideas or images a legislative body believes to be unsuitable for them. Libraries and their library governing body should not resort to any age restrictions in an effort to avoid actual or anticipated objections, because only a court of law can determine whether or not content is constitutionally protected. Article 7 of the Library Bill of Rights, which I believe this library is a member of, all people, regardless of age, origin, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. This includes students and minors, who have a right to be free from any unreasonable intrusion into or surveillance of their lawful use of the library. Now, the mission, goals, and objectives of libraries cannot authorize libraries and their governing bodies to assume, abrogate, or overrule the rights and responsibilities of parents and guardians by any stretch of the imagination. As libraries, we affirm the responsibility and the right of all parents and guardians to guide their own children's use of the library and its resources services. Libraries and their governing bodies cannot assume the role of parents or the functions of parental authority in the private relationship between parent and child. Libraries and their governing bodies shall ensure that only parents and guardians have the right and the responsibility to determine their children and only their children's access to library resources. Parents and guardians who do not want their children to have access to specific library services, materials, or facilities should also advise their own children. Libraries and library governing bodies should not use grading systems to inhibit a minor's access to material. This principle of library services applies equally to all users, minors as well as adults. Lack of access to information can be harmful to minors. Libraries and their governing bodies must uphold this principle in order to provide adequate and effective service to minors or run the risk of violating civil rights. Now, the second issue I'd like to discuss is I heard at the last meeting the board is considering setting up a Christian section in the children's library section. Now I refer to the Establishment Clause from the Supreme Court. The Establishment Clause was extended to apply to the states through the 14th Amendment and prohibits laws dealing with the establishment of religion. Neither the state or federal government may enact laws which aid one or all religions or give preference to one religion or another. According to Justice Hugo Black, the Establishment of Religion Clause of the First Amendment means at least this: neither can pass laws which aid one religion, aid all religions, or prefer one religion over another. No tax in any amount, large or small, can be levied to support any religious activities or institutions, whatever they may be called, or whatever form they may adopt to teach the practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. James Hines.
And with me, a copy of the book most of you are probably familiar with. It's called Robert's Rules of Order. And want to call your attention to chapter 7, number 43. It's a long thing, but I'm just going to do a little bit of it. In my copy, on your copy pages may be different if you've got a copy. It's on page 379, so talk to me about that. And it's talking about debate of a proposal before a group. And it says, remarks must be germane to the question before the assembly. That is, statements must have bearing on whether the pending motion should be adopted. I have attended 8 of the last 10 meetings of this board. And I realize there's a problem with keeping things germane. I go to more city council meetings than I do library board meetings, and it's a major thing with Chris Moore that the discussion goes widely afield, and I know it's hard to keep it on it. But I do recommend, and by the way, also recognize that boards have a right to set their own rules, so if you want to say it doesn't have to be germane, you can't do that. I recommend that you propose this. On most of these things, we've had discussion about, people's sexual preferences, when the only thing we're talking about is the protection of children, of whether, okay, we're gonna have this, but should it be in the children's section or not? Folks, if they want to, and I have no objection to this man, even though we won't point out a lot of what he said is not a law, or to know what is law and what is a court opinion, and not just something that was passed by another board like you all would put out a thing expressing your opinions. But that's appropriate in its section. But folks, if we're going to get into things like discussing our lifestyles and that sort of thing, and it has nothing to do with the issue at hand, if we're going to discuss that, it needs to be moved out of the discussion of the proposal, and we need to stick to what the proposal is, because all that this has done over the last several months is cause division, hard feelings, called for people to be, there have been statements that were almost libelous against members of this committee, and it's not by chance I'm looking at Mike and Mark, because statements made should they should not be asked to resign just because their opinion is different from somebody else's opinion. If we only gonna allow one opinion, why do we need more than one member of your board? We need to stick to the topic, do what is in. We're making progress now that somebody has stepped forward and said, let's cut through all this stuff, let's get through the issue. And I think it's our new director, and I want to commend him for that. So, I do ask that in question future, let's try to keep things germane to the discussion. If they've got extraneous material, do it during a section like we're having now, rather than during the debate of something else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin Martin.
All right, first I want to speak to you about the 2020 audit report that we received in December. It states that the accounting duties are being performed by one employee and the management has not segregated duties to adequately reduce the risk of fraud or error and safeguard assets because of limited resources. This was also identified in the 2017, 2018, and 2019 audits. Management's response was that accounting duties will be segregated to the extent possible with current staffing levels. You cannot segregate duties in the accounting office with one person. It's impossible. The library has $6,661,000 in cash. This is not limited resources. The board needs to insist on that management put additional personnel in the accounting office and segregate duties before our county has another holiday issue to deal with. The auditors also state that the library did not have the necessary controls in place to detect and correct the misstatements in the financial statements prior to the audit, as it took 14 journal entries to correct the books. They state that these missing entries would have resulted in a material misstatement of the financial statements as they totaled over $5.5 million. These entries include a deposit posted twice, investment accounts not adjusted to the year-end balance, fixed assets booked as expenses, and errors in accounts receivable, accrued payroll, payroll taxes, and accounts payable. Management indicated that they would review the records and adjust as needed prior to the audit. I really wonder if anyone here knows what adjusting entries would need to be made, and have the correcting entries been made for the 2021 audit that will begin soon. Lastly, the audit identified a significant deficiency, noting that the library had prepaid their janitorial services, which is not allowed in a government agency. They were paid 6 months in advance. Management stated that they were unaware that they were not allowed to prepay expenses. As a government agency, how does our management and accounting staff not know what guidelines they are required to follow? I have serious concerns about the finances of our library and hope that the board will get involved to fix these issues. I would also like to appeal to the board on the material reconsideration form that I submitted on the book later later. Here's a few quotes from the book. Parent alert if you want to remove your children from hearing. You little fuck buddy. What the hell? Let's have an orgy. Last night, he pulled me aside to offer me a Vicodin tablet to smooth things out. Where'd you get the Vicodin? From his bro, who I'm pretty sure does some farming on the side. Farming? As in pharmaceuticals. Have you ever given Logan a blowjob? No blowjobs for you, Missy. I have not had too much peppermint snobs. Remember the pole dancing party? Well, the sex toy party is part of that whole lineup, and Aunt Sadie finally agreed to host it. Anyway, Emma, she's the sex toy one, has been calling endlessly to pester Aunt Sadie about details. Would Aunt Sadie be willing to pose in lingerie? How many pairs of handcuffs should she bring? What about S&M? Is that going too far? Changed my mind about the dildos, ring locks, all sizes. Based on this library's reading manual guidelines, I recommend that this book be read. Page 19 of the manual says you can and should read items of poor content. Mediocre writing style, especially material that is written quickly to meet the popular interest that has passed. I believe Later Gator falls into this category. Page 18 of the same manual says you should consider reading a book if there are more suitable materials available and if there is budget available to provide funds to purchase more satisfactory items. I believe we can find more suitable materials and know there's money in the budget. I would also like to point out that the library committee referenced reviews from Booklist and the school library journal. Booklist recommends this book for grades 9 through 12, and the school library journal recommends it for grades 10 and up, so ages 15 and up. However, our library has it in the teen section where minors several years younger than age 15 are encouraged to browse and select books. I ask that the board set a standard that we will not use our tax dollars to encourage the youth of our community to participate in drug and alcohol use and various sex acts by reading the book Later Gator from our collection. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So again, so we're gonna be purchasing copies of that book for all of us to read, or?
Tanya told me back in November when I challenged it that they purchased the books. They're here somewhere.
Although we already have it.
Our next speaker is Untitled. I may have probably mispronounced it. Apologize.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Kier Heil. I was born and raised in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I've lived in Northeast Arkansas my entire life. 2 years ago, I moved back to Jonesboro with my wife and my kids, who are notably not present tonight, despite being here nearly every single month since this issue started with a pride display last year. The reason they're not here is because of something that happened at the board meeting last month that I'll get into in a minute. I wanted to start by just doing a quick show of hands on the board. You don't have to participate. This is not an official vote in any capacity. But is there anyone on the board who would oppose a Black History Month display in the children's section of the library? What about an Indigenous Peoples or a Native American display? Juneteenth? What about a Pride display? See, representation is important. Over spring break, my wife and I took my oldest child to New York City, and we visited a park outside of the Stonewall Inn. If you don't know what it is, it's important to the history of the LGBTQ community. But what's important to this story is, in that particular neighborhood, there are pride flags and trans flags hanging from every building. Like even the crosswalk has rainbow stripes going across the street, and there's plaques talking about the history there and what the LGBTQ community had to deal with and how they overcame it. And there are statues, two statues, one of a man and a man holding an intimate conversation together, and another of a woman and a woman sitting together holding hands on a bench. They're obviously romantic, but not inappropriate, not sexual, not explicit in any way. And then here's my 12-year-old awkward purple-haired kid who is othered and hidden away in their own community based on who they are and who they love. And they're just beaming. They're smiling from ear to ear, surrounded by pride flags and rainbow crosswalks. And we haven't seen anything like that since last year in June in this room at that pride display that kicked off this whole thing. You see, that pride display didn't hurt any of your kids. It didn't hurt any kid in this room or any kid in this community. But it meant the world to my kid. It made a difference to my kid. Now, when I described those statues, I said they were romantic, but they were not explicit or sexual. And I did that deliberately. You see, when I last spoke to this board, it was in October. And that was during a rhetoric shift. You see, during that time, Mark Nichols had changed the rhetoric. Whoa, hang on. We're not worried about LGBTQ material. We're worried about explicit or sexual material. That's all we're worried about. And it was disingenuous then, and it's disingenuous now. And you want to know how I know it's disingenuous now? Because of the board meeting last month. And I said I would get to it, so we're going to get to it. See, last month, we started to reach a compromise, and as with all compromises, neither side is happy. The thing that I was unhappy about was the fact that there would not be an LGBTQ display, no pride display in the children's section in the library. But you know what hurt worse? The fact that when that was announced, half of this room stood up and cheered and broke into applause. And my 12-year-old kid, who was brave enough to stand up in front of this board in December and talk about the importance of inclusion and the importance that the library remain for everyone, said, "Dad, I have to go to the bathroom." And they locked themselves into a stall and they broke out in tears. Now, I want to address the room for just a second. You all claim that you're just thinking of the children, that you're just trying to protect the kids. But what about my kid? What about my child? Who's protecting my kid? Who's looking out for them? Now, I'm going to be at the back of this room at the end of the night. And I want you, anyone, to come and explain to me about how not having a pride display is going to be beneficial for my kid. About how hiding away some of these books and materials is protecting my child. Make that make sense to me. That's all.
Thank you. Vanessa, do you want to explain our number 4 item, the library board meeting policy, the change that a board member, I think, has proposed?
It's on page 2 of that policy. It's an addition entitled Policy Proposals. The Library Board of Trustees is responsible for introducing and/or approving new policies and updates to current policies. Any updates or new policies must receive a majority vote by the board for the changes or new policy to go into effect. If a policy or change of policy does not receive the majority vote by the library board, the policy will not go into effect. Policies that fail to be accepted will not be allowed to be presented again to the library board for 6 months after the initial vote. And that's the addition.
So as it stands now, before this, any one of us board members can present a policy on the agenda, and then we go to the meeting. If it gets a second, then we vote. That's what it is now, right?
Yes.
But this would change that.
No.
This
No, we
says-
still go through the regular procedures.
So so I can still introduce a policy to be voted on before the board. Because the way I read this, the library board trustees is the one responsible to introduce it. So is this just a formal introduction, or what do you mean by that terminology?
It means if you present a policy to the board and it fails, then you cannot present that same policy again to the board for 6 months.
No, the first sentence. The library board of trustees is responsible to introducing and approving new policies. I guess these are new policies to be considered by the board, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I can't, by reading that, it's the trustee, right? That's actually the one that approves whether it gets to be on the agenda or not. Is that right?
The board chair approves the agenda.
Right. So right now, I can put something on the agenda as long as it's within a certain number of days before the meeting, right?
Right.
Is that gonna change?
No.
So can we change the language to reflect that? Because it seems just, I don't know why we need this language otherwise. Help me understand.
I'm a little confused on that, but I don't think that's correct, because I think what it basically, the way I take it, I didn't write it, but the way I take it is, you put something on and you vote on it, and it doesn't pass this month, you can't bring it up again next month. You have to wait 6 months. That's the way I take it.
Well, then we need to remove that top line, because we're talking about two different things. I agree with you that if we have a specific policy and it doesn't pass, then, we wait and see. That makes sense to me. But it's the first line I'm talking about, that It's the library board of trustees that pretty much is the sole person that really controls what gets on the agenda. That's the way I read that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, that's how it is, I mean.
Right, but that's not the way it is now.
How is it now?
Well, any of us can email you.
Any of us can
and
email
ask
you
how you
a
guys
policy.
put this on the board? But he's saying when you reach this first sentence, he thinks, it sounds like you go through Janice, and then Janice okays it, then it goes through you. Is that, am I right?
I don't really read it that way, Mark. Because it says the board of trustees, we're all trustees, it doesn't say the board chairman.
So no, it's okay, not the chair, the board of trustees are responsible for introducing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't change
And
that.
so that really means any of you on the board.
Okay, any of us, okay.
Yeah, I don't take it that it just be me,
Okay,
not the way I understand it.
yes. Okay, so the major change really is just the 6 months, the 6.
Right.
Yeah.
It's, just keep it as it is as far as how to introduce a policy,
Okay,
just restricting the number of times you can present a failed policy.
right. And, you know, I guess it's a little bit subjective, I mean, if it's the same policy, I think that makes a lot of sense. But there may be, you know, a different policy on the same topic or something like that, it may, that's not part of it.
Well, we'll have our attorney check that for wording first.
Right. Okay.
Any more discussion on this? I hear a motion.
I shall move that we accept this, policy proposal.
Here's a second.
Mike Johnson, second.
Okay, we're gonna vote. Mark?
Haley, aye.
Michael, aye.
Shall take aye.
Michael Johnson, aye.
Motion is approved. Vanessa, you want to speak about our lending policy now, the change?
This is something that we discussed at the last meeting. It's about R-rated DVDs. It's just an addendum to the policy stating that, movies with a motion picture association's rating of R are not allowed checkout by patrons under the age of 17. Parents may waive this restriction and allow their child to check out R-rated DVD movies by presenting a photo ID to the circulation desk and stating that they waive this restriction for their child. A note will be added to the underage patient's account stating the parents wish to waive the restriction. The underage patron will then be allowed to check out R-rated DVDs without further parent consent, or parent being present.
Is there any discussion about this?
Vanessa, do we have a lot of, parents that allow their kids to check out R-rated DVDs? I mean, is it
I don't know, really, I don't know. And I don't think that this will change very much. I mean, most children, their parents are usually with them when they check out DVDs anyway. But in case a 15-year-old comes in and wants to check out an R-rated movie, if there's not a parental note on his account saying that he is allowed to, then he will not be allowed to.
And Vanessa, just for clarity, since we have got a clarification on this since the last meeting, tell me if I'm saying this correctly. Okay, if you don't have something in there saying you don't want your child to check that out, if your child goes and checks it out, you can't come back and say, hey, I want to see what my child checked out, because that is against the law.
That's correct. A parent cannot go back and check their child's previous checkout record.
So just for clarification, so everybody knows it.
Where's that? I'd like to see that law. Is that readily available?
I kind of dropped the ball. I really did intend to bring a printout of that law to everybody, and I just didn't do it. I'm sorry. So I'll bring it next time.
Okay.
I apologize.
Let's give her a break. I reminded her tonight, I said, I wanted you to bring a copy of that law so that people could see it, and, you know, she's been busy, and
But, you know, it is the law of the state of Arkansas. If you want this change, you know, go to your, if it's something that you're passionate about, go to your lawmakers. But right now, we're not breaking the law, not under my watch, we're not anyway. Or Vanessa's, or any of the board members. So, the lending policy, do I hear a motion to approve?
Johnson makes a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
I shall take second.
Are there any more discussion on this? Mark?
Haley, aye.
Michael, I,
Shall take aye.
Michael Johnson,
The change is approved. So parents, just remember, if you don't want your kids checking out R-rated movies, be sure you put something in there with the library.
That's not how it's written.
That's not what it says.
That's not how it's written.
Okay,
It's not, yeah, it's not an opt-in, it's an opt-out. So it's automatically going to, as soon as we can get the catalogers to get this done, it will probably take the rest of the month. But probably, I can't promise, but hopefully effective May 1st, any underage child coming in to check out a movie, an R-rated movie, will automatically not be allowed to check it out.
unless the parents give permission.
Correct.
Okay. Pandemic policy.
Really, nothing has changed. We keep bringing this up every month to reevaluate the lifting of the mask mandate. And I wanted to tell you that fully vaccinated residents in Craighead County come to 47%. And that, so it's higher than it was, but it's still not at 50.
Does that have to include all the boosters? That's fully, is that one shot?
That's, fully vaccinated means, all four.
All boosters?
I think we talked about it last month, just leaving it, we took the mask mandate off, and of course, you know, if, God forbid, if it gets real bad again, we probably will have to bring it back, but let's be positive.
So, Madam Chairperson, if we're not gonna change anything, no action needs to be taken here because the mandate's been lifted, right?
Right. So I don't think there's anything we need to do tonight.
We just need to bring it up every.
Hey, Vanessa, you want to give your report?
Just wanted to tell you a couple of things going on. We have a new branch in Brooklyn that has not had any kind of ribbon cutting or grand opening because it opened during COVID. So we are planning to have a ribbon cutting Monday, April 25th at 3 p.m. And then we're going to have the grand opening that same week on Saturday from 1 to 3. If you come out, you can get a cupcake and you can sign up to possibly win a Kindle. And we're going to have some music there, I believe, from Legansy. I think, are you coming to?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll have a dance area. So if you want to come dance from 1 to 3 on Saturday, April 30th, come by the Brooklyn Library.
What's the date it's officially open?
The ribbon cutting is Monday the 25th. It's already open. It's been open for a while.
What time is the ribbon cutting?
Ribbon cutting is at 3 o'clock. Yeah, we'd love for you all to be there. I know it's hard when you're in a school. I'm sorry. That's the only time we can get the chamber there. Also, I wanted to address the water leak in the Doctoral Public Library. Fortunately, nothing was damaged in genealogy. That's the place that we would really worry because a lot of those materials are out of print. The only books that were damaged were the books that were donated in the bookstore. And we are still waiting for the insurance adjuster to give us some information, and then we will get the carpets cleaned. We also have an art and craft festival coming up on Saturday, April 23rd from 9 to 2 out on the campus of the library. We hope you all can come. It's also going to sort of be our pre-summer kickoff, so there'll be a lot of entertainment. And then several of the library staff are attending a women's leadership conference at ASU tomorrow. I wanted to let you know about that. And then I wanted to address the statement that I made last month about the absence of the pride display in the children's department in June. And I want to address the LGBTQ community in particular. I realized that there were hurt feelings and disappointments last month when I announced that we would not have a pride display in the children's department during Pride Month in June. We will continue with pride displays in other areas of the library. In the children's department, we will continue to provide access to age-appropriate LGBTQ materials for children, parents, and teachers. We are not sure how much room we will have for displays once the children's department renovation is complete. If we have space for displays, we will attempt to present equal representation for all who reside in Craighead County. The purpose of displays is to feature a particular holiday, a major world, national, or local event, a hobby, an interest, or a reading genre that may or may not have been featured in the past. Not all citizens in Craighead County will be interested or agree with every display or item on the shelves in the library. We are here to do our best to meet the needs of all citizens of this county, regardless of interests or beliefs.
I'm trying to see if there's a weather alert.
Ms. Adams?
Vanessa?
Is the Harrisburg library closed, or is there any future of it reopening?
Oh, the Lepanto library is, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, the Lepanto library is closed temporarily because the roof was blown off. We are working on getting the bookmobile service. As soon as it's back, we're gonna get it ready and we're gonna start sending it once a week. And we are gonna move the contents out of the library into a temporary location as soon as possible. We're just working on some budget issues with Wednesday County.
We are down for limited public comments. Was anyone wanting to speak? If not, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I so move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Mike Johnson, second.
All in favor? Mark?